is the answer to your best decision because she's in the room, or it's the best decision otherwise?
That's a great question.
Hi, Ronnie. Welcome to the Gut Show. How's it going?
It's going great. I'm super happy to be here. How's it going, Kajesh?
Yeah, it's going good. Uh, awesome. Cool. So let's get started with the first segment, which is personal. So how did you get in computer science and crypto in general? Like what has been your origin story?
My origin story. Oh man. I don't know. I wouldn't say I had like too interesting of an origin story. Studied computer science in uni. Got in. Kind of had like a normal. Went to Berkeley. Was up in the Bay Area. Kind of had like a really kind of normal path into tech, like straight out of university into like big tech. Started my career kind of as a dev at Apple, and then during the whole 2017 bull cycle, um, kind of got exposed to. I had like taken some classes or I taken a class in at Berkeley, and like learned about Bitcoin and learned about how like blockchains worked, at least like the basics of the tech, and so kind of like understood a bit like kind of what was going on, but didn't really fully understand the whole why it was so exciting. And then during the 2017 bull cycle, there was like a couple devs that were just like trading inside of the office, which was funny, or they'd have charts up. And they're in like all these trading chats and stuff, and so I started like looking into it a bit more, and then read the Ethereum white paper, and that was the first thing that really blew my mind. And I was very interested in it from that perspective, from the perspective of like a global, decentralized, distributed like world computer. That was like kind of the messaging at the time, and thought that was like some of the most exciting stuff. And so when you mix that plus like bull market plus like first job right out of school, not like super exciting as like an entry level developer, decided to like kind of jump ship and kind of go straight into crypto. Didn't really have any plan, other than like I knew I wanted to like work on kind of the tech and work on open source specifically. I think was one of the things I was really excited about, and kind of haven't looked back ever since.
Cool, that's really awesome. You mentioned you went to uni, and like how was the life there? Like what uh like like why do you think it's good? Like why would you recommend anyone to go there instead of like self-learning?
Yeah, I think. I mean, it's hard. It's hard to say. Like, I think it really depends on the situation. I think there are some instances where like university is like a total waste of time, and people should just skip it and go straight into doing whatever it is that they're doing. And then I think there's like other instances when it's like a great time to spend like 2 to 4 years, to kind of take the time to learn like really, like learn new things that you otherwise wouldn't learn. And I think it's really case dependent. And it's not like you often will hear the advice that's like, oh yeah, if you're majoring in something technical, then like go to uni. If you're majoring in like sociology or something, then like don't waste your time. And I think that like advice is like maybe in aggregate correct, but it's also just not like super correct. Like I've met like a couple like like really like smart technical people as well that just like skipped uni. Like they were part of like Teal fellowships and they were like super happy about it and did more before they turned like 22 than like I've done up until 30 or whatever. And so yeah, it's really hard to say. I think it's like really case dependent. I think university is like a great thing to do, if you are like really interested in really hard technical problems, and you want to like get exposed and like to like things like higher order mathematics and research and be able to like do things that you probably otherwise want to do. Like you're probably never going to learn about like I don't know, you're probably never going to actually like pick up a real analysis book and like kind of and learn that yourself. You might have like taken like calculus in high school or something like that, but you'll never actually like pick up like a measure theory book and like learn how that works. Not that that's like useful in practice, but it's like useful, I think, kind of, to like get exposed to and like take those classes. And especially for like, there's some like concrete stuff like linear algebra and a lot of the math behind like AI research that like might be kind of useful. Maybe not like super useful in practice because like, I don't know, as far as I can tell, I'm not an AI researcher. And so there's like a lot smarter than people that could comment on this stuff. It seems to be more like as much like systems engineering and experimentation that it is like kind of like theoretical mathematics. But I think like university is like it's pretty like useful if like you kind of want to get exposed to that stuff. And so, yeah, I don't know. I think it depends on a case by case basis.
Cool, interesting. Uh, and so how was like you mentioned before, like you went deep into open source like after getting into crypto. Like what was uh, like zooming into that, like what was your love story with open source?
So yeah, I mean, I think as a developer, open source is like really attractive for a lot of reasons. So like first, like, most developers, they like get a job, whether it's at like some big tech company or some startup, whatever, and like their employer kind of like owns all their work. And that like totally makes sense. That's like the contract, like, the startup founder or the employer that takes a lot of the risk. And you give your time for like a good salary in exchange for like work product that then the company owns. And that's kind of like the normal world, right? Um, but as a developer, you could actually extract much more value from your employer if like your work is simply just open source. And the reason for that is like, there's several reasons, right? And like, the first reason is just like, well, that code now exists. Maybe there's some favorable license that'll allow you to use it in the future. And you could always reference that stuff in the future. And so that's like maybe like the first reason. And then the second reason is like, well, you can get exposed to a lot of things that you otherwise wouldn't get exposed to, right? Whether it's people that you meet like through PRs or issues, you start like building a network, right? And that's like a really like valuable thing, I think, as a developer, because you always want to be exposed to new opportunities and learn from new people and stuff. And so I think that is like a really compelling part as well. Like, I think like from my experience with like both Anchor and Backpack recently over the past like 2 years, I just kind of learned that there's like a lot of much better developers in the world out there than I am. And if you just like have open source code and you like create issues and you are open to people, filing PRs, and like they'll teach you stuff, and like it's not going to be like directly, right? But you'll like see people do stuff and you're like, oh wow, that's like a much better way of doing it than I would have done it or than I had originally had done it, and I think that's like a pretty awesome thing. And so like I don't know, like I think from that was like maybe like that's like one way of looking at it, which is like I'm an individual developer and I want to, get more value out of my job. And so open source is like valuable from that perspective. But then that's just like maybe the perspective of an IC, right? From the perspective of like maybe like a business owner or somebody who wants to create like impact on the world, open source is like really incredible because it really turns like the product or the code or the tech from simply just like a product into like a community or a movement, right? And you start getting all this human capital and human like kind of energy and momentum behind a project that you otherwise wouldn't be able to get, and that only comes from people buying into stuff, right? And so when you can open source something with like a favorable license, then that's like a signal to the world that like they can depend on this piece of code. And so they're willing to contribute to it and willing to support it. And so it's a great place to get started, especially as like a developer just starting out that might not have a network or that might not be able to rally that type of like human momentum to kind of build like really awesome stuff. And I can say that like one of the biggest, I mean, it's not a surprise in hindsight, but I guess what surprised to me was that like I didn't really expect to like, or I guess when I first started my career, I didn't really understand how important quote unquote networks are. And like it's like a silly term, right? People say like, oh, I'm gonna go networking, whatever, and it's like you kind of laugh and you'd be like, yeah, that sounds silly. But really like who you are kind of around and who you're kind of friends with and who you like mutually respect is kind of like will determine how far you can go in terms of like the awesome stuff that you can build. And I think from like I think a good example is just like with Anchor, like I met like a lot of really good devs on Solana, and other devs like on Ethereum that like kind of were exploring Solana. And a lot of those devs basically joined me with the new latest backpack adventure. And basically all of the devs, I think we have seven or so devs on the new team, and all of them except for one came from open source contributions to Anchor or other repos that I was a part of. We only had one that came in through a normal recruiter. And so I think that is like a really awesome kind of example, right? And, we didn't do any normal interviews. It's simply like, we're not quizzing people on like whiteboard questions. It's really like, here's code base, here's problems, go solve the problems. And you can get like a much more accurate measurement of somebody's like work style and abilities, and overall kind of, gauge the experience that you'll have working with them by just like seeing how they'll interact with you in an open source repo, right? If somebody can like merge in a PR without any help, without any guidance, without any like back and forth or in review, that's like a really good sign. And a lot of like the people we've hired have basically come in through this funnel. So I think open source is really incredible for that reason as well. And then maybe there's like other kind of, more crypto or more Web3 related reasons why open source is useful, which is really more on the topic of like decentralization and security. And so like, like maybe in the context of something like a DAO or a decentralized community, like, how do you build a DAO, right? And like a really fundamental part of it is being able to like see the source code, analyze it, verify it, and then like vote on like or govern like what this code is doing, right? Because the code's always, and these smart contracts are always governing these on-chain systems that are incentivizing people to act in a certain way, right? And so it's really important to be able to see like the code and analyze it and verify it and audit it and make sure that it's doing kind of like things that are reflective of the values and the intention of the community that is like supposed to be governing it. And so you can't really have a decentralized protocol without open source. And so from that perspective, open source is also valuable. So there's like a bunch of different ways to slice the question, and a bunch of different reasons why open source is exciting. But I think those are maybe a couple of the most compelling reasons to me.
Yeah, that's really great insight, and it will be probably like great for developers who are like really new and like getting into open source, or like looking for a value in like building open source. Uh, so zooming out a little bit, you mentioned about like Backpack and Anchor. Most of the code is in Rust, except the front end part. Uh, so we have this quote, Rust, in Rust we trust, but why should we trust in Rust? And what are your Rust thesis?
So I think like it really depends, right? So I think Rust is a really wonderful programming language for a lot of different reasons. Maybe like the first order reason for me is like, well, it's a cool programming language if you're interested in programming languages, because there's all this like kind of cool stuff that it does, right? This whole concept of like compile time checks for things like, eliminating data races, and things like that I think are really compelling. But maybe, more pragmatically, like why would you use Rust? Well, I think it really depends. I think actually in most cases, most teams don't need Rust. And the reason for that is basically that, well, and I'm saying this as a Rust developer and somebody who loves Rust, I think really the first question you have to ask is, well, like, what is your goal, right? If your goal is to like build fast systems or minimize bugs, or have the smallest like possible memory footprint, or decrease latency, increase throughput, that type of thing, then like, okay, yeah, Rust sounds like a pretty great programming language. But the job of most developers is not that, right? The job of most developers is actually to make their company more valuable. It's about business value, right? And that's a function of like many different things, right? It's a function of decreasing costs. It's a function of like increasing revenue, and like getting that kind of margin, right? And so the question is, well, like, what are you building and why are you building it? And I would make the argument that like, well, most people aren't going to maximize business value with Rust. And the reason for that is basically that um, like business value is often like a function of like a lot of things, but namely development speed and the ability to like hire people to kind of to kind of to quickly ramp up and contribute valuable like lines of code, like on the order of hours or days, not like weeks or months. And I think like there are other kind of more lightweight practical programming languages to like achieve that. I think like JavaScript, TypeScript are obviously good examples. If you need something faster and more close to Rust, like Golang is a great programming language. And so if you are caring about, if like microseconds matter to you and like jitter matters to you and like memory footprint matters to you, and you're like building like a high performance like trading system, or you are building a smart contract runtime where the thing has to run at the speed of light on a distributed system all around the world, and the smart contracts that are running on it also have to be lightweight and fast, then things like Rust are great. But if you're building like a simple like CRUD website that's supposed to like manage your blog, or is like a new competitor to like, I don't know, Discourse or something, not Discord, but Discourse, then something like, a Node.js environment might be better, right? And then, there's also the question of like, where you are in the life cycle of the company. There's plenty of companies that started out in a lighter weight programming language, and then once they hit scale, they switch to Rust. Like Discord, the chat message app is like a good example of this. They switched from like Go to Rust because once they got to huge massive scale, Go just wasn't cutting it, and they needed to go faster. So there's all these things to consider. And so it's really a question of like, what are you building? Why are you building it? And what point in the life cycle are you in the stage of building it when you're like considering like what programming languages that you should use. So I love Rust. I've used it a bunch, but I'm not a Rust maxi or anything, and I think it all depends.
You are one of the few people I've met who spend very less time on like not much important things like shaving. So what's up with the no shave?
Oh, oh. Okay, so if I'm going to give you like the real honest to God answer behind that, it's like okay, it's like a weighted function of like a couple different things. The first thing is like, okay, I just don't like enjoy shaving or like cutting my hair. Like that's just like extra work for things that, like I would rather do, right? You only have like so many kind of like, seconds on the world, or on the earth. And like, I don't want to spend seconds kind of like doing these tedious things, but that's like fine. I think like, uh, uh, if you balance it out, then like, maybe looking marginally better might like improve my quality of life, and so like maybe I actually should do it. But then you have to like also consider some like other like idiosyncratic things. Like I think if I had like a really good trusted barber that like I can go to, that I was like close with and stuff, and was like kind of reliable and gave me a good consistent cut. Then I would probably go and get my haircuts, and maybe like meet up with like the old friend and things like that. But I just haven't found that, right. And like I don't know, maybe I'm just like you see this like on movies and TV shows and stuff, and like romanticizing that. But like normally my experience when I go to a barber is like I sit down in the chair, right, and then this person has like scissors or a knife, right. Really, scissors are just knives, right? And they're like kind of they're cutting your hair, and they're cutting, they have like the sharp blade, right? And it's like at your throat, and it's like that's kind of a scary experience, right? It's not like actually scary, like let's get real. But it's like that it's like I don't know if I want to do that, right? And normally it's like some awkward small talk, and it's like, well, what do I talk about? And it's like a person doesn't find me that interesting, and like I'm not very good at that, and so it's like when you consider those two things. And then you just consider just like momentum and inertia, right? So it's like, well, it's gotten to the point to where it's like there's no return, And it's like, I don't know, at some point I'll probably get a haircut. But normally what I end up doing is like I'll just let it grow and then shave it all. And then kind of just like continue that process. But I don't have clippers with me. Um, and so when I moved out of California, I left my clippers there. And so um, now I have no way of cutting my hair. So that is my attempt to give you an interesting answer to an otherwise maybe not interesting explanation to what's up with the beard. Um, but winter is coming, and I'll be in Chicago soon, so hopefully it becomes in handy there.
Yep, definitely. Yes. That's a very interesting answer, and I think half of our listeners would be laughing on the floors. Great. Also, okay, this is I think like this also means like this is also the answer to your question where you eat like this is also the answer to the question of like why do you just eat like fast food most of the time, at least in the office I've seen.
I don't reckon. No, no. I think. Oh, well, I guess. So I think the fast food is like a combination of like time plus, um, plus like delicious, like desire to like eat delicious fast food, plus like in my own inability to like cook good food myself. Um, like there's not really any good reason other than just like it's a bad habit and like I should stop eating fast food. I think like fast food is like kind of in the category of itself because it has like long term health effects, and probably affects your productivity. And so like I don't know, I'd probably be more productive if I like ate healthier food. Um, but um, yeah, I don't know. I don't have a good answer. I mean, yeah, I mean, you make it sound like I'm eating like McDonald's every day. Um, but uh, but yeah, I don't know. I don't recommend eating fast food. I don't really have an interesting answer to that.
Got it. The last question of the personal segment. What's the best and the worst decision in your life?
Oh, that's a good question. That's a really deep question. The best and the worst decision in my life. Um, let's start with the best question because I think that's maybe a little easier. I think probably the best decision, also like maybe the most important decision in your life is probably like yeah, it's probably like your partner or so like meeting my wife basically. Just because like that is probably the single individual that like probably has like the most impact on your like day-to-day happiness and your like life trajectory. Um, and so I don't know, I feel like that was a pretty good decision. So I feel like maybe that's probably the best decision up until this point. Um, not that that's like, particularly like um, you know, uh, impressive or difficult or anything like that. It's mostly just like I mean, it shouldn't be luck, but I feel like it kind of is. It's like you get maybe it's not lucky to like decide to do it, but it's definitely luck in terms of like how you run into that person. Um, so I think that's probably the best decision of my life. The worst decision of my life. Um, yeah, I don't know. There's plenty of bad decisions. I don't know if I have one that particularly like come. Yeah, I don't have a good answer to that. Sorry.
Is the answer to your best decision because she's in the room, or it's the best decision otherwise?
That's a great question. No, she's not in the room right now. So that would not describe that would not explain my answer. No, that was an honest to God answer. I actually think that is like probably the most one of the most important decisions you'll make if you choose to have a significant other.
Awesome, sir. The next segment, career. Uh, how is it getting into Apple? like the largest company in the world?
Yeah, I think like there's a lot of pros and cons of like working at a big tech company like Apple. Apple's like a bit unique because it's like a really old company relative to like Facebook or um, some of the or like some of these other kind of newer companies. Um, and so there's like a lot of both like technical kind of um, like idiosyncrasies and also cultural idiosyncrasies about the workplace. Um, I think like in aggregate, it's like a good place to work, but probably just like wasn't the right place for me. I think like the main things that like was not satisfied with there was like so like the first thing was just like the insane amount of like um, of secrecy, which I totally understand and admire and respect, and is probably something that in some way, shape, or form, like I would recommend people to emulate, like their whole kind of goal of like giving Christmas morning surprise to kind of their customers to surprise and delight them is like a really, really beautiful kind of um, like metaphor to describe like what the company is trying to do or the emotion it's trying to invoke in its customers. Um, but working there, it's just I found it a bit strange because like a good example is like when I was there, like that's when the iPhone 10 was coming out, and it was weird because there was like part of the team like had clearance or whatever to like see the phone, and then like part of the team didn't, and so there's like this like weird kind of paranoia amongst like people even internally, let alone externally, about like what you're working on, who's allowed to see what you're doing. You have to like go like take a class to like get clearance on stuff, and so like it felt like it was very structured and very bureaucratic in that sense, which like I guess makes sense for like the biggest company on the planet, um, but also makes no sense if you're like a new grad developer that just wants to ship stuff and have like maximum impact on the world, which I think I would have like described myself as at the time. And so it was really not a good place to grow as like to maximize growth as a young kind of engineer, um, from that perspective. But then also from the perspective of like the stuff that you're actually doing there, at least the stuff that I was doing there. So I was like working like on like I was like in the division that would like work on the apps, and like tools that were like built that were shipped with the phone and with the Mac OS. So things like calendar, reminders, contacts, these things. And so like you're just working with proprietary Apple software, right? And so from the perspective of somebody that's like investing in themselves and the skills that you're getting, you're really just like gaining skills that are like kind of it's not totally proprietary to Apple because like I don't know software engineering, but like I don't know you're programming like an Objective C and like kind of these like old like C frameworks that like nobody in the world uses, right? So if you like leave the job, you can't really like take those skills and like use them to like start a company or use them to like work in another job, right? It's all just like very specific to Apple, and so from that perspective, it was also not like super fulfilling, right? And so you're thinking about the trade-off that you're making and like the value you're getting as an individual and what you're giving up as an individual. It just like wasn't at all worth it for me. And so yeah, I think great company, but just like wasn't really kind of the right fit for me. Um, but they make amazing products, and um, yeah, it's an incredible place to work for sure.
Yeah, that's really very interesting view. Like most of the new grads like dream of joining Apple and like growing there. But like this is like the first time I've heard like such view where like a new grad would like think about like the impact you would like put on the world. Um, so I think this all answers my next question. Like, why did you like shift from like Apple, the number one company, to a small startup crypto hedge fund?
Yeah, so I mean, you have to keep in mind that like Apple is such a huge company that like when you're a new grad and you're joining, it's like you're just like nobody, right? And so the impact that you can have is so small relative to the impact that like the executives have or like senior like leadership has, right? Um, and your job as a new grad or is very different than like your goals as a new grad, right? Your goals as a new grad is simply, or at least my goals was to like learn from the best people and like build as much cool stuff as possible and have as much impact on the world as possible, right? And there's a bunch of different components to all of that, right? And I just didn't really feel like I was checking a lot of any of those boxes really, especially when you mix together kind of the cross team like paranoia. It's like, oh, can I even like enter your office space? Do I have clearance to talk to you about what you're working on? It creates all this friction to like meeting people and to like learning from them. And you're really just like isolated to your team. Um, and, um, and so like, I think, making the jump to kind of crypto. So I never really wanted to work in trading. I worked in trading for like totally by accident and for like 3 months. And it just like wasn't really for me. I was always kind of more interested in like working on like product development and systems like kind of um, and so like when I decided to leave Apple, it was more just from the perspective of like, oh, this like crypto thing's happening. It looks like the coolest thing happening in tech right now. Let's go like check it out. And I didn't really have any like plan or I didn't have a job at the time. I just like started like contributing to like random repos online and kind of just like trying to figure out a way to get my foot in the door. So I didn't know anyone. I like literally had no contacts, no friends working in the space, and I like didn't even know how to like get started. I was like following everybody on crypto Twitter, but I like I didn't have any followers, and I did like trying to like figure out my way in the world, right? And so I think like yeah, I think I accidentally kind of ended up kind of working on trading for a bit, but then decided to leave and after 3 months and jumped into Ethereum, kind of like head first and met some amazing people there, and then kind of just been like working in crypto ever since.
Hmm. Cool. So if you had a time machine, what would you do, like in your like career end of your life, career side of your life?
That's a good question. I mean, I guess I would tell myself to like not ask that question because um, I think in aggregate you're always like nobody really knows anything. And there's like there's like a I forgot who said this. I read it on Twitter once, but like somebody's like, oh yeah, like there's like no adults in the world, right? Everybody's just like a kid trying to figure it out. Like there's no like buddy who has like all the answers and all the wisdom and all the experience. Albeit there is people with a lot of wisdom and lessons to learn, and you should learn from them vicariously. But like in aggregate, like you're always better off making the assumption that nobody knows any better than you, and that you have the ability to figure it out yourself. And I think if you have that mindset, um, I think um, that kind of makes this whole question maybe not super it's not like the right question to ask, right? Because like if you're going back to give yourself advice, well, it's like, well, is that advice going to be useful? It's like, well, I don't know, like because like everything's so everything's so context dependent, right? And so the advice that like you might give yourself might not even apply to yourself, right? And you like see this all the time with like startups, right? Because like every startup's run differently, right? Some move fast, some move slow, some are conservative, some are think of their team like a family. Some of them think of it like a professional sports team. Some are trying to kind of you know um, shoot for the moon and like totally change the world, and some are just trying to be lifestyle businesses, and so like advice in general is always context dependent, and so it really just depends, right? um, and so like I don't know, well, what would be the advice I would give myself if I could go back in time? I think it would just be to um, so maybe not to go too far in one direction. I think you should definitely learn vicariously from other people, and not repeat the mistakes of others. I think there's like a lot of wisdom out there, and you should download it into your brain and utilize it. But at the same time, I would try to instill confidence in myself, to say that like you don't have the answers and you might not know, but like neither does anybody else. And what's important is just that you don't like give up on like solving the problems, and you just keep going until like you solve the problem. And so I think that to me is like the most important kind of orientation for somebody, especially somebody that's like just starting out their professional career.
Cool. Awesome. Why did you choose Solana over like the other blockchains? Like before Solana, you're part of Oasis, and like you mentioned, you also like liked Ethereum. Like, why did you choose Solana?
So in like 2018, 2019, I was working on Ethereum state channels. At the time, Ethereum had like led this huge Ethereum and Bitcoin had led this huge bull cycle, where there's this promise of like Ethereum being this like world computer that would like change the paradigm for like modern computing. You have decentralized apps. And there was this huge appetite for it, that was largely unsatiated, or the at least from a technical level wasn't able to kind of do what it was like trying to do. So there was this huge kind of wave of entrepreneurs and technologists that tried to solve this problem, right? There's a bunch of different ways of approaching it, right? There was L2s, there was new L1 architectures, and I was looking at, and I was like working on one of those things, right? I was working on L2s, on state channels, and slowly came to like the kind of opinion that like a lot of the approaches that people were trying at the time were compelling, but they had like huge trade-offs. And in particular, the one approach that I was not a fan of was I was not a fan of sharding at the L1 layer, which was at the time what Ethereum started moving towards. They were like, okay, we're going to shard, and then we're going to have like L2s for like things like plasma and state channels. This is all like very old kind of Ethereum thought processes that are like no longer relevant at them anymore. They're no longer doing like traditional execution runtime sharding, where they were like sharding the address space into different like separate blockchains and then connecting them all via a relayer. That's like no longer on the roadmap, but like at the time that was like the game plan. And so I was like basically looking at that, and then looking at that plus L2s, and basically came to the conclusion that it's like this is going to be like a pretty bad user experience. And this like isn't the right way to scale blockchains. And so started investigating other L1s for that reason, and kind of got exposed to Oasis. And the basic idea with Oasis was like, okay, on the one hand, they had like privacy, it was like a core kind of tenet of like their design. But then also a non-sharded scaling solution was like another kind of tenet of their design, where they were trying to take some ideas from more like traditional distributed systems, research papers, and apply that to kind of blockchains. And so basically got exposed to that project, thought it was interesting, didn't really kind of it was one of the first examples of a team that I thought was like trying to like very explicitly avoid sharding in their scaling solution. So I kind of just thought, okay, these guys are really smart. Let's just kind of let's go see what they're doing, and and like learn from them, right? And so joined that team, worked there for about a year, and then basically fell into Solana kind of by accident. But Solana in the early days was like, it was a really, they kind of, they're a really interesting case study because they really ruthlessly prioritized what they shipped for like an MVP. And their bare bones MVP was much more bare bones than than any other L1 I'd seen up until that point. And I think like most other L1s just simply wouldn't have shipped what Solana shipped, which is a really interesting like lesson to learn, I think, which is to say that like, well, your MVP could actually probably be like way worse than you actually think it can be. And like the best example of this is just like the developer experience. Like every other L1 basically shipped with like very well thought through like developer experiences. Like, you know, Polkadot had Ink, Near had like TypeScript, WebAssembly contracts. They also had like nice Rust contracts, nice Rust code gen. Solana shipped their MVP without even the ability to use Rust macros inside of the runtime, which is like kind of hilarious in hindsight. But like you literally couldn't have built Anchor on day one of mainnet because the Rust version that they were supporting, like you couldn't use Rust, you couldn't use proc macros basically. And I remember like being in the Discord asking like, you know, Michael Vine saying like, hey, like, can you like, can we use Rust proc macros? Like, and he was like, no, you know, we need to update the Rust version or whatever. I said, please, can we do this? Because nobody's going to use this unless, you know, we get some code generation in here. But it was a really interesting case study because none of that really mattered, right? What really mattered was, it really mattered was like, on the one hand, just like base layer scaling. And on the other hand, kind of new value propositions and applications that could now be built that could never have been built before. And so like the first example of this was like an on-chain order book. And so when Solana kind of introduced that, that was the thing that kind of like opened up people's imaginations and got a whole generation of builders building on the blockchain. Because not only did you have a 10x improvement on like latency and throughput, but you also had this totally new thing that people wanted that couldn't have been built anywhere else. And I think both those things are really important, and really the first kind of informs or fuels the latter. And so, you know, I think what Chase Barker likes to say is like came for the tech, stayed for the vibes or something like that. And I think that's like more or less accurate. Where Solana just has this like incredible developer community of like really kind, really smart people that is like kind of grown and is now kind of standing on its own 2 feet. And so it's like an awesome place to work, really incredible community, and super kind of happy to be a part of it.
Cool. What are your Saga thesis?
My Saga thesis. That's a good question. So mobile is probably the most important platform. I mean, it is the most important platform for modern computing. It is what has distribution to the entire world. And it is really how you have any application like make a real substantive impact. All of the biggest apps in the world are all basically mobile apps. And so if crypto and Web3 is to kind of, you know, quote unquote, go mainstream, right, then it needs a mobile platform that is crypto friendly. And so that is the starting point for the conversation. Then, well, you might look at the world and evaluate kind of the existing, you know, mobile platforms, and the very obvious and conclusion that you'll run into very quickly is that like, well, none of the existing mobile platforms are crypto friendly. In fact, they are very anti-crypto. And not only are they anti-crypto, they are abusive towards crypto. You literally cannot build a lot of the crypto applications that you would want to build today because, you know, specifically on Apple and iOS is against the terms of service. Things as fundamental as token gating experiences are simply against the terms of service. So basically all of Web3 can't run truly in terms of as Web3 apps on any mobile platform today, unless you like do something like sideloading a new app store into Android. But on Apple and iOS, you simply just can't do this. And I spoke with Magic Eden about this, and was trying to kind of like learn like, oh, why guys Apple is allowing Instagram to mint NFTs. Why can't you guys do NFT trading on Magic Eden? And the answer is like really surprising to me, which was to say that like Apple takes the 30% fee not on the profit, For NFTs and on digital goods, they take it on the entire value of the NFT. So if you have like a Bored Ape, or a DeGod, or one of these higher value NFTs, um, and you sell it on your platform, Apple does not take 30% of the profit. They take 30% of that entire value. So if you sell like a Bored Ape for like $100,000 or whatever, you now owe Apple $30,000, even though your profit might have been like $1,000 or whatever. And so Magic Eden literally just can't exist as a marketplace on iOS. And it gets much more dire than this, actually. It's not only like you might take the stance that's like, okay, well, like you can't have marketplaces, but you actually can't do anything with NFTs, right? Because you can't do something as simple as token gating a Discord chat. Like that's against terms of service now. And so all of these kind of digital Web3 experiences where you have this NFT or this self-sovereign asset that acts as this like membership card to a digital kind of experience, you can't do that on iOS, which kind of eliminates a whole host of experiences, right? It eliminates your ability to do NFT ticketing, and it eliminates your ability to do NFT social networks. It eliminates your ability to basically do anything with utility and an NFT. And so this is one of the most important problems currently in crypto. And if it doesn't get solved, then I think I'd make the statement that like, well, crypto will never actually go mainstream without mobile. And so if this is your view of the world, then the question is, well, how do you solve it, right? How do you make crypto enter the mobile era? And you might you have one of two options, right? You either wait for Apple and Google to do something about it and to start becoming more crypto friendly, or you don't wait for Apple and Google and you decide to do something yourself, right? And I think the Saga thesis is like, well, let's not wait for anybody. Let's just go for it. And so I think that is kind of the starting point for the conversation. And then the question is, well, like, why is Saga a good phone, right? And there's a couple like key kind of features that it brings to the table, right? So like the first is like table stakes, right? Which is just like, okay, we have a new Web3 app store. If you're Magic Eden, you can publish on the app store, and we're not gonna deny you. And so, okay, that's a great starting point. Let's do that. Ship it. That's a good. That's super important for crypto. But then the second kind of point, which is a little more interesting, is, well, everybody has these secure elements on their phone, right? These secure enclaves where your private keys are stored. Let's actually expose the secure enclave as an API to developers, so that we can move the wallet private key management from user space into the operating system. And so what's really interesting about this is that it basically means that these companies, whether it's Phantom or MetaMask or whatever these big wallet companies are, they no longer own your private keys, and now the operating system will. And this has a lot of implications for the Web3 user experience in general, right? Where now you could have applications not do this like horrible kind of UX of like deep linking into Phantom or into MetaMask and like context switching into a different app. But instead you have this native transaction signing view where you can just simply hit an API and it looks and feels like exactly what you want, right? It might feel like Apple Pay or something very native into the phone. And so that's like a really awesome UX improvement. I think that'll be really important for crypto. And so I think these are a couple of like the kind of key kind of features that it provides. But all in all, the basic thesis doesn't need to go any further than like mobile is the single most important kind of thing for every developer on every blockchain, and we should all be working together to bring crypto applications to phones. It doesn't matter what blockchain you call home. And so it's really as simple as that. It's the biggest opportunity, and I'm super excited and happy that the Saga team is really going for it.
Yeah, that's true. Like like Apple Pay, like Apple's like 30% thing like really sucks, and like Saga removing like this second part is like the best thing. Uh, so going back to the next controversial, like this has been like really controversial like last 2 weeks about like Metaplex like owning NFTs, sorry, Solana NFTs like token standard, and like being the only organization holding it. Like, what are your thoughts on like the whole controversy or situation?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question that brings up a lot of like really interesting conversations around um, the Solana community, both at the social layer, but also at the protocol layer in terms of the smart contract. Um, but ultimately, and there's a bunch of different ways to slice this conversation. Um, but ultimately, the question comes down to a question of governance, which is to say that like you have this single program on Solana, which is the token metadata program, that um, that basically controls and runs all NFTs on the network. And currently, there's a single entity. Um, I don't know. I don't know technically which entity it is. It's one of the Metaplex entities that controls this program. Um, and because there's this feature on the Solana programming model, which is to say that like you have the ability to upgrade a program, you can arbitrarily change the bytecode, and if you can arbitrarily change the bytecode, then you could arbitrarily change the account data, and that gets owned by that program. And so what that means in concrete terms is that every NFT on Solana can be changed, from your NFT to an arbitrary picture of its choosing, and every NFT on Solana is susceptible to the governance of this program. And currently, the governance of this program is this single entity, and that's not necessarily bad, right? And so we should be careful to not um, to accuse Metaplex of like doing anything bad here. I think this conversation tends to get like overly emotional. I think Metaplex is a great organization with awesome engineers, really nice people. But I think this is an important question to solve, which is to say that like I think it's a lot of people's belief that NFTs are the single most important thing on the network right now. And so the question is, well, like, has this program outgrown this single institution? And should it be governed in a much more robust way? And I think the answer to that is like unequivocally yes. And I think the Metaplex team would agree with this. And then the question is, well, how is it governed, right? And you basically have one of two options, right? Or you have maybe more than two options, but the two options basically boil down to like, well, should it be governed by the Metaplex token, or should it be governed by something else, right? And that something else could, there's a whole, set of kind of governance structures that you can choose from. But morally speaking, the idea is like instead of it just being Metaplex token holders, it should be representative of Solana as a whole, right? And that is ultimately, I think, what the question is. And everything else kind of like falls out of this question. And I think I have a single opinion on this. I think that like, and I think it's like there's a lot of different kind of ways to have this conversation. But I think like long story short, I think the token metadata program is an asset standard. It is not, it's an asset standard that was developed by Solana and then given to Metaplex. And I think this asset standard should be neutral to the network and not favor any given token over any other token. And so I think like I would prefer, instead of any governance structure, really, I would prefer it to be, my vote would be make it immutable throughout the upgrade keys. And if you want to make improvements, make a new program. And so I think a lot of people would disagree with that statement, which it's very reasonable people agree with that statement, and there's like good reasons to disagree with it. But that's kind of my view of it. I think this program is basically just like super fundamental. But I think the drama and the reaction really has come out of this very it's accumulation of things, right? It's accumulation of like it's basically an immuno-response to the Solana community as kind of trying to protect itself against future FTX like situations where you have this like single institution that goes down and that you have all this contagion across the network, right? And so now people are very alert to like governance, and they're very alert to mutable, upgradable programs, and they're trying to defend themselves and their business against this. And so I think that's really where all of this is coming from. And it's coming from a very healthy place that will make the network stronger rather than like these more kind of emotional, places that people easily fall into with this conversation. But I think ultimately it's a question of robust governance that should happen sooner rather than later. And there's no real reason to wait, I think. Like this could happen like this week if people really wanted to. And so people are pushing for that, right? And then there's like a bunch of other related questions that fall out of this, like, which is to say that like, well, how should we do creator royalties on Solana? Or like, well, what if I want to create my own program and I don't want to use your token metadata program? And I think these are super important questions. But it all kind of falls out of this conversation. And they're all kind of like subtly different topics that, are all complex and that, I don't have the answer to. But I, think that they're really productive conversations for the Solana community to have as it like matures and hardens as a decentralized kind of community.
Yeah, that makes sense. After the whole FTX chaos, like people have started to like not trust the social layer and like trust no one, like move to complete decentralization. And
Yeah, I think that's a really great summary, actually, Gajesh. Like, it really comes down to like people lost all trust in the social layer, even like really good people, really like respectable people with integrity that I would allow them to like watch my kid have been like attacked and kind of questioned on Twitter. And it's coming out of a very kind of it's sad and it feels bad, but it comes out of a very healthy place in terms of like decentralized hardening. And I think that's where all this conversation is coming from.
cool. I remember I tweeted once, like the first time we met. We took a picture and I posted, uh, uh met the Solana CTO. And then I remember like in few months, like the next few months, like I was in the Bahamas. You told me like during one party, like uh a person I don't want to mention approached you and said uh, like uh you're she or he assumed that you are the Solana CTO. Uh, how does it feel?
What happened was the somebody had approached me. I think it was like during a conference or something, and they assumed I was the Solana CTO, and the network had gone down, and so they they chewed me out or whatever because they had some business or whatever. They had a business, and their community was upset or whatever, and they're like, "Oh, how can you let the network go down? What are you doing to fix it, et cetera, et cetera." Which is like, yeah, totally understand the emotional response and think it's a reasonable thing to really push on. I don't know. How did it feel? I don't know. It felt like I'm not the Solana CTO, so the person was just confused. I don't know. Like it was an interesting interaction. I didn't really think too much about it, or yeah, I said I wasn't the CTO, and the person felt bad and moved on.
Cool. Awesome. What is the okay? To the next segment, Coral. Like, what was the birth story of Coral and birth story of Coral Backpack and XNFT?
Yeah. So the birth story of Coral is simply that like I was already doing like a bunch of stuff on Solana, like namely the Anchor framework, and it got to the point where I wanted to like grow the team because it was basically just like myself working on it, and I wasn't working with anybody, and it was kind of like I was like this like lone ranger basically, and I was like, all right, let's build a team and 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 build a proper company and work on not just Anchor but just like um, more things to kind of push the ecosystem forward, right? There's like a lot of important problems to solve, and like let's go do it, right? Like the Solana, I think, and I was just really excited about Solana and wanted to kind of build a company. So Burst Story was basically like did that and started recruiting folks and getting people to join the journey. And then the story behind XNFTs, I think, was so the story behind XNFT and Backpack. There was like kind of a long-winded like idea process to get us there. But basically, I started like hiring folks for Anchor, but then I was thinking, well, what's after Anchor, right? So there's Anchor, there's APR, which is like the source code verification registry. That was like kind of an early experiment. And then there was like, well, what are, what I started thinking about NFTs and like, what are like the big things to kind of like work on there. Right. And, just started like thinking through various kind of ideas. And I think like the first like real idea that I got really excited for was, I was sitting with one of the creators of Psi Options, Taylor Johnson, and I gave him this idea of what if we did like MMO mechanics on Solana, right? And that was like the first like real idea I got like really excited about. I was like, oh, well, what if we did Quest on Solana, right? And there's like some existing products like this. I think like Rabbit, I forgot what it's called, like Rabbit Hole or something. And the idea is like, oh, let's just build a protocol that every protocol on Solana can hook up to, where they can like basically be quest givers. And you can build a protocol that did this. So if you're like Mango Markets and you want to like create a quest like trade on Mango, you can do that. If you're at Magic Eden, you want to create a quest to trade on Magic Eden or to buy an NFT or to mint an NFT or whatever, you can do that, right? And you can like kind of think of like Solana or like crypto in general as like this huge like kind of like MMO and this like huge kind of game, and you can have this quest book and this quest log of all this cool stuff that was going on. And so that was like the first like real idea, and it was like, oh well, like we were just like, oh, what if we were like sitting one night and we were just like thinking about like crazy stuff, right? Like what if we like created like games for people to do like PvP on Solana? It's like one of the early ideas is like, oh, well, what if you just like made a race and you said like first team to like to burn like an entire 10K collection to zero like wins like a prize or whatever, and that maybe that prize is like a trophy NFT or something. And it was just like make them as crazy as possible and really try to like stir the pot and like really challenge kind of the social kind of layer of the network. It's like, I don't know, it's exciting, right? It'd be fun. And really just like kind of do just like fun kind of silly things like this as a starting point. And so I got really excited about this. And then started kind of down this path. And then that's when like kind of Tristan came on board and started kind of ideating on it with Tristan. The conclusion eventually was just like, all right, well, we need a Chrome extension or a wallet or something to basically do this properly, because well, you're going to need this Chrome extension to like go to different websites and like inject and stuff into the web page and be able to like act as the quest book, right? So the extension would be the quest book. And then it's like, okay, well, it's not just an extension, it's actually a wallet, right? And so at that point we're like, all right, let's make a wallet, because that's like a really good starting point for all of this stuff. And then the question is, well, like if you're going to make a wallet, like how do you make a really good wallet? And then that is really kind of where I started thinking about wallets kind of like from first principles, and thinking about like, well, what is the wallet experience? What should it look like? And what should we actually build here as a prerequisite to like the Questbook stuff? And so started thinking about wallets. And the first kind of real kind of obvious thing that most people run into is like, well, a wallet should be secure, and before we get mainstream adoption, we need to solve a lot of the security problems, because right now you have this like pretty horrible experience where like people lose their mnemonics, and then they forget their seed phrase, or they lose their ledger, like falls in the water or something, and then they're toast, and they no longer have their their crypto, right? It's like, all right, well, let's solve this, and let's solve like the security problem where like people are getting rugged and stuff. So I went through this whole process of like thinking about how to do secure smart contract wallets, basically, where you can have things like social recovery, things like dead man switch, things like withdrawal limits, things like 2FA. And so you can allow normal people to use self custody. And still think this is all good ideas, stuff that we should probably come back to. But we started thinking about this and designed a whole protocol around this. And then, started thinking more about like, okay, well, like that's one component is security. And then what are some other components, right? Well, then the next question is like, well, or not question, but the next kind of obvious thing is that, well, if multi-chain is going to be a thing, and I think to me, multi-chain is like trivially obvious. Minimally, we have Ethereum and Solana. I think we'll have like a lot more, obviously. You're not going to have multiple extensions or multiple wallets, right? So it's silly to have a single extension for each network that all do the same thing of like managing your private keys and stuff. Instead, you should have a single extension, right? So multi-chain is like table stakes basically for me. And it's like, okay, well, like, you're going to have a multi-chain wallet. And that's just like inevitably what the future will look like. And whoever does that is that's going to be a necessary, maybe not sufficient, but a necessary condition for a successful wallet, right? And so that's going to be a requirement. So we should build a multi-chain wallet, and you should do that as fast as possible. And then you think, okay, well, like, multi-chain, this secure smart contract wallet. And then you think, okay, well, like, secure smart contract wallet is tough because it's like chain specific, right? You have to like rewrite this smart contract in this system for every blockchain. So that's a bad place to start because, well, it's going to be hard to get to market and hard to do that quickly. So let's put that on the side. And furthermore, like that's probably not going to 10x your users, or to be a 10x like value proposition for most users. And I think there are some cases where like security is a 10x value proposition. Like for example, I think in the case of like the Slope hack, if you had like a secure smart contract wallet at that like week, that probably would have been a good time to bootstrap a user base. But I think like, for better or worse, and probably for worse, it's not going to be a 10x in people's minds. And so decided to like put that on hold, but definitely want to come back to it. I think it's super important and something I'm like super kind of excited about. So that's kind of like another kind of, so there's like those two things are like the starting points, and you start thinking about this and it's like, okay, well, like you have multi-chain, like what does that actually mean, right? And basically it means, well, like you need a plugin system, you need every protocol and every blockchain inside of a single kind of user interface. And this is basically what leads you to XNFTs. And XNFTs are a specific like instantiation of this kind of idea of like a plugin system, right? And so you build this protocol in Solana where you have XNFTs, where you can, record the ownership of a piece of code in the same way that you can record the ownership of a piece of artwork. And so this is what leads you down the path of XNFTs, which I think like pretty naturally falls out of a great multi-chain wallet user experience. And so this is kind of like the next kind of like thing that you run into. And then the last kind of thing that you run into is, well, you start thinking about, okay, like what does the future look like? It's like, okay, we have security, we have good self-custody, we have multi-chain, we have some plugin system in the form of XNFTs, but also we have technologies like Saga, right? We have the private keys moving down from user space into the operating system. And well, what are the implications of that, right? And I would make the argument that like, well, as soon as that happens, then most of the value proposition for most existing wallets, whether it's MetaMask or Phantom or whatever, kind of goes out the window, and they become nothing more than like glorified dashboards, because they're no longer the arbiter or the controller or the API layer for applications to use your private keys. That is now the role of the operating system, right? So the operating system basically will compete with MetaMask and these existing wallets as they currently exist, right? They're basically just dashboards at that point. And so if that's the case, then you really need to start thinking of wallets not as private key managers. You really need to think of them as consumer experiences. And so all of these things kind of like come together as like the foundational thought process for thinking, or for how I think about wallets. And this was kind of what led us down the path of Backpack and XNFTs. And it all kind of started from this like genesis of like thinking about like, well, how do I build MMOs on Solana and make this Questbook kind of product, which is something I think I continue to like be excited about and continue to want to play around with. And maybe it's something we'll come back to with the NFT project. But that was kind of like the whole kind of thought process for the whole kind of journey.
Yep. Yep. I like most of the time, like say like last few, like I spoke to Oliver and Taylor like last week, and like they mentioned like the same thing, like how like in your apartment, like y'all were discussing about like Questbucks and MMOs. Uh, cool. So how was the shift from being a software engineer for about 5 years to sorry 5 7 years to being a founder?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question because so I think the main difference is that you stop thinking less about building the machine and you start thinking more about building the machine that builds the machine. That's like the main difference, because I think as a founder, kind of your job is not so much writing the code; it's finding people that are smarter than you to write the code, and empowering them to like be the best, to put them in a place where like they can make um, quick and fast and good decisions at an engineering level, and building kind of like the social system in the form of a company to like facilitate like good outcomes. And that comes like in many different forms. There's many different tasks involved there. Like hiring is probably the starting point, right? And that's like the single most important thing. Like if you had to distill down like the single most important like job of any founder, right? It's basically just to hire the right team. And if you do nothing more than that, then like you and you hire the best team possible, right? There's obviously a lot more than you should do, but if you do nothing more than that, then like you more or less have like done like a large part of your job, and you should try to get the system to like kind of the company to run itself. But then there's like a lot of other stuff, right? You think about like compensation and incentives, right? You think about like kind of individual kind of preferences and how to like get the most out of people and make them the happiest so that they can do their life's best work. And then maybe like, the other most important thing other than hiring is thinking about product market fit, right? Those are probably like the two things. And if you know those two things as a founder, you basically don't have to do anything else. Obviously you should do a lot more, right? There's still operations and there's still executing, but really at the end of the day, those are the two things that matter as a founder. It's like, how do you find product market fit, and how do you hire the best people? And those are two things that you should constantly be reevaluating. And that's like the biggest shift in terms of like how I spend my time. It's basically trying to solve these two problems. And so like I think like I still try to do a lot of engineering work. I still think I'm still a strong believer that like managers should still ship code. I think like Elon Musk, as much as people like to debate his like kind of management techniques, I think I more or less like agree with them in aggregate, which is to say that like I think he had a good analogy, which is like the the general or whatever of a cavalry. Like imagine if that general didn't know how to ride a horse. Like it would make no sense, right? And so like as a manager and as a founder, I think it's really important if you want to have a really well functioning like engineering and product development team. You need to be a product person yourself and need to be very hands on and kind of in the trenches with your team, shipping code with them, and kind of nothing is kind of like below kind of nothing is like below kind of your, I don't know what you want to call it, your title. And so, yeah, I try to ship like as much code as possible. It's a lot less code than I would normally be shipping if I was just like a full-time engineer. But that's also like by design, right? We have like a lot of incredible engineers on our team that are much better engineers than I am. I think basically everybody on our team I would consider a better engineer than me. And so I think a lot of my goal is to like stay out of their way and to allow them to run as like an independent thread, utilizing them as much as possible. And then in terms of like the engineering that I'll do on the day to day, it's mostly what I would call quote unquote shit shoveling, which is to say I'll like clean up stuff, do like nitpicks, make refactor code, stuff that like people that I can do with like 30 minutes at a time, right? Because I don't have like a lot of like deep work or a lot of time for like a lot of deep work. And so I think like that's like the main shift. It's like a lot of like just consistent details you have to think about as a founder. Like doing podcasts like this is like more common. Getting on a lot of calls to deal with like or to facilitate inbound like recruiting requests. Talking a lot with external teams, getting feedback on the product. That's like trying to solve product market fit, right? Thinking about like what our customers need, what people want, how we can do partnerships. Marketing is like a big thing, right? And so yeah, I think like there's a lot of details, but that's like at a high level, more or less kind of the difference and like kind of shifting from like being a full-time engineer to like full-time founder and part-time engineer. But I would say that like we're like very engineering driven and product driven, and so I like to consider myself, more or less a full-time engineer, even though I'm a quote unquote founder, whatever that means.
Cool. I'm just imagining like right now, like you have around like 500K of lines of code written on Backpack. Like what were like imagining like if you are like completely full time, like how much you would code. Uh, awesome. Do you think like there is a difference? Like there is a huge difference between like raising a kid and like raising a company?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, I'm only a couple months into raising a kid, so I wouldn't say I have as much experience with that. But I think like I mean, yeah, there's definitely like big differences, right? Like with a company, you're dealing with full-fledged adults, and a company, it's like a company is all about building a system, right? Instead of like a computer system, though, you're building like a social system. Um, and so I think I would guess that's like probably pretty different than raising an individual kid, although maybe not so different than like building a family, right? A family is also a social system, especially if you have more than one kid. You need to think about scheduling and like, extracurricular activities in school and people's like making sure they're developing properly, making sure everybody's like, home for dinner at the same time. There's a bunch of stuff, right? But I don't know about any of that, and I'm learning on the fly. So maybe ask me that question in a couple of years.
Definitely. Cool. Yeah, so I have like I remember like I asked you a funny like question when Tristan was out of town, and like you gave me like a really deep answer to that. And like that time I was just in the mood of kidding. I'm not sure if you remember that, but it's mostly like revolving around like what are like Core's like work ethics and like work culture.
Oh, that's a great question. That's a great question. So before answering that, I think it's really important to maybe articulate how I view like opportunity. I think the metaphor I like to use for opportunity is that like opportunity is kind of it's kind of like a rare Pokemon that emerges out of the ether. It's just like it wasn't there before, and suddenly it's there. And when you see that Pokemon, you have like some window of time to catch it. Um, and if you try to catch it before that window of time or after that window of time, you don't catch it at all, and it's more or less like you might as well not have tried to catch it at all, right? And I view opportunity as basically the exact same thing. Um, and so what that means is like, if you want to succeed as a company, you need to identify these windows of opportunity and basically sprint as fast as possible to seize those opportunities. And if you don't, and if you and if you capture that opportunity before or after, right? If you ship the product too soon or too late, then you might as well have never shipped the product at all. It doesn't matter how good the code is. It doesn't matter how fast or performant the system it is. It doesn't matter how pretty the UI is. It's all about timing. And this is like kind of my fundamental fundamental view of opportunity. And so overlaying kind of a startup, I think then you have to ask yourself the question like, well, what opportunities are you going after? Are you trying to build a lifestyle business? In which case there might be like many opportunities and the windows, there might be a lot less competition and the windows of opportunity might be much larger. Or are you playing in the VC kind of Olympics, where you're going after the world's biggest opportunities and you're trying to build billion-dollar companies, and your goal is to either capture the opportunity and make a billion-dollar company, or your goal is to fail and to crash and burn and go to zero, right? That's kind of like the VC model, right? For better or worse, that's the incentive structure. And so you have to ask yourself like, well, what game are you playing, right? And so with Coral, we are very much in the latter category. We are a venture-backed startup. We are trying to go after some of the biggest opportunities in the world, and that is like the mandate given to us by our investors, right? And so that's kind of maybe the place to start the conversation. And so when thinking about work ethics and work culture, it's with this as the backdrop, right? It's like everybody that comes onto the team comes onto the team with this with us being very upfront about this, right? It's everybody buys into this concept that like we're going big or we're going home, and we're going to like work our butts off to be able to capture these opportunities, and that there's tons of competition. I think a wallet specifically is probably like maybe the biggest. It's like wallets and marketplaces are the two like products with like the most competition in crypto, and you have to be insane to like try to like build these things, because like there's already these huge incumbents, right? And so the culture is very much everybody buying into this kind of this understanding of the game that we're playing and the rules, and the requirements to be successful at the game, right? And I think Reed Hastings and Netflix kind of like put it very eloquently, which is to say that they thought about startups, in particular venture-backed startups, not as families but as professional sports, right? And so if it's very common in professional sports for players to get traded or for them to get demoted, or for them to not get re-signed, right? Because it's cutthroat, right? In order for you to win a championship, in order to win a Super Bowl or an NBA championship, you have to be the best in the world. And so you constantly have to be editing your team, constantly have to be upgrading for better prospects. And so that's not to say that we're like, hiring people every month or every week or every day. But it's definitely directionally closer to this mindset than it is like saying that like, oh, we're a family, right? If somebody is like dropping a pass, I think, every day, and they continue to drop the pass, and you're trying to score a touchdown, at some point you have to bench that person and replace them with somebody that can actually catch that pass, right? And so this is kind of a lot of the backdrop with it. And so I would say we're definitely, have that mindset. I think speed is the other kind of like big cultural kind of value that we have, which is to say that like speed wins. I think empirically this has just been true with like every big startup. It's always fast moving teams. Like there's a reason why like every VC says this. And I think a lot of people don't like this, and they don't like to hear it, because like I think the conversation kind of gets muddied because they don't realize what game they're playing. But I think if you're playing in professional sports, then you need to operate like kind of at that level. And if you're playing, at your local YMCA with kind of like a pickup game, then, you play at another level, right? But we're definitely trying to play like a professional sports team. But with that said, I think that's kind of the competitive mindset. I think in terms of like operationally kind of our culture, we're very much, we try to run the company with, it's like this weird hybrid between like an open source project where there's a lot of asynchronous work, a lot of working in public, a lot of like, GitHub issue management and PRs and stuff like that, very engineering driven, but then also, try to also bring some like structure and good lessons from like kind of normal like startup land. And so we try to have as much structure or as little structure as required, so that we're all kind of going in the same direction, but as little structure as possible for the sake of empowering people to like make decisions, but which leads to kind of 10x 100x kind of productivity outcomes. And so very much try to organize the team in the terms of like, you can think of it as like parallel threads, where we have like one person working on the mobile app, one person working on like multi-chain, one person working on the app store and protocol, and one person working on messaging, and try to like organize the team in terms of like these parallel processes that can run independently. And this is really nice because if something goes down, you know exactly who to call. And that person can feel empowered to like own that part of the stack, to make decisions themselves and not have to deal with like bureaucratic processes, and live or die with like the decisions that they make. And I find that like this is a really good way of like structuring teams that with like really experienced kind of product builders and engineers, because it allows them to make the decisions and to feel a sense of ownership and to maintain context in their domain, which is kind of what gives you these huge productivity outcomes.
Gotcha. That's really insightful, and I think many like team leaders listening to this would like really get a lot of like notes and tips from this. Oh, sorry, tips from this. Uh, awesome. Uh, like what? I think like this, like your previous answer, like question. Sorry, your previous answer also explained like how backpack is like hyper shipping. Like I remember like couple of months back, we shipped like Cardinal wrapped NFT within like 24 hours of the issue created. Uh, so like what are the pros and cons of hyper shipping?
That's a good question. So the pros, and this was told to me by a friend that used to work at Tesla. The main pro, I think, is that you tend to not know what you're working on is probably wrong, and you're not going to know that what you're working on is wrong until you get it live into the hands of users. And your goal is generally to be less wrong. And so you want to fail fast and also succeed quickly. And so you should ship as fast as possible, so that you can get this feedback as quickly as possible. And this is particularly important in the beginning stages of a company, where you're exploring the idea maze, you're trying to find product market fit. And this is very much like the phase that we are at the moment. And so this is like probably one of the biggest pros. There's obviously much more like mundane pros, like you can just ship more. You get, everything else being equal, faster is better. But that's not always the case, right? There's always like big cons. And the main con is as well, you have bugs, right? And it's more likely that the software breaks. And I think it really depends on what you're building, but like accurately modeling the cost of bugs is really important. And so if you're like building a spaceship, or you're where there's humans on board, or you're building like an X-ray machine or a hospital system, the cost of bugs is extraordinarily high. Or a self-driving car system or whatever, because there's lives at stake, right? Or if you're building a smart contract, the cost of a bug is extremely high. Because because value is at stake, right? Tokens or money is at stake. But if you're building like Facebook, or you're building like Twitter, or if you're building like a messaging system or a notification system or whatever, the cost of a bug is like a lot less. And I would say that like probably in both cases, particularly in the latter case more so than the former case, but in both cases, and generally, engineers specifically model the cost of a bug way too high. usually I would say at least 10x too high. And you're almost always better just shipping something as fast as possible with bugs in it. It can be ugly, so that you can get that thing into the world and get feedback on it sooner rather than later. And that's really the ultimate trade-off that you're building. And I basically try to, always kind of keep this in mind. I think we are in this weird spot where we are doing a bit of both, where we have some very sensitive stuff like key management, but then we also have non-sensitive stuff like kind of notifications and messaging and things like that. And so it always depends on what you're working on. But generally, I think failing is totally fine. Bugs are totally fine, but it's context dependent. But I think most engineers that are listening to this should always kind of ask themselves the question, like, what is the worst case scenario if like there's a bug in this code? And I think most engineers are trained to be perfect and not trained to think about like the expected value of like their time. And in most cases, it's not about like minimizing cost, it's about maximizing the difference between value created and cost induced. And that's really the main that is really the objective function that you want to optimize for. And that especially in a startup context, it's really important to think about every second of every day.
Gotcha. Interesting. My next question is like, do you consider Saga as like your competitor? Like, I have not like dig deep into like Saga and like XNFT, XNFT's like collab. But like, do you consider Saga as a competition? Because like people will be like building apps and like putting it into the Saga marketplace, and there's also like in this case like a person can also use like other wallets like Phantom or Soulflare. Like why like I would love to like know more about it from you. Like this is also like I spoke to like many people, and like this was one of the things like they brought up, like why would someone use XNFT when Saga is coming up?
To me, the answer is like definitively no. I mean, it's like saying like, is WeChat a competitor to like iOS or Android? Definitely not. Definitely view Saga as like one of the most important pieces of tech for Backpack and XNFTs. The goal with XNFTs and Saga is to have them load on the phone directly. And so if you have an XNFT, you can just see it like natively on the Saga App Store and load natively on the phone. So if you build an XNFT and you build it in React Native or whatever kind of tool set you want to use, it should you would check all the boxes, right? And the main difference and the reason why you would want to build an XNFT is for two reasons. One, if you wanted to load on every platform, right? You wanted to load on desktop, on Extension, on iOS, on Android. Or on Saga, iOS and Android is kind of like to be determined how we do this. It's probably going to just be a web view because App Store rules. But yeah, no, it's totally meant to be a complementary thing. The main difference is that like XNFTs are going to be like decentralized, and so like I very much view like they're both decentralized and also have like Backpack specific context. Optionally, it's totally not required, but like we have APIs and stuff and like an ecosystem that we're trying to build out where you can hook into things like Backpack identity, Backpack like context, things like messaging, etc., that are all like very useful. But this question is only relevant really in the context of XNFT as applications. But a large part of our effort, kind of, especially over the next month or so, is going to be XNFTs as digital collectibles. So we're going to do like a whole NFT project. It's going to be a profile pic 10K collection. And that's going to be the first example of XNFTs as a digital collectible. And so from that perspective, they're like totally not even close to being the same thing. And you would view the XNFT collectible in the same way you would view like a Bored Ape or a DeGod inside of your wallet.
Awesome. Wow. Uh, so what was this is the last question from like of this Koro segment. What is the origin story of WoW and Blue Balls?
Got it. So the origin story behind WoW and Blue Balls. Okay, so it all started basically. Um, we were sitting in a room thinking about, okay, like we had this concept of an XNFT, but I'm a big believer in memes and basically I sat down and said, okay, we need a meme for this. We need like a name for this. We need something that's like we need to brand it. And it can't just be like decentralized apps, or it can't just be like plugins, right? It has to be something else. And so we started thinking about this, and one of the engineers on our team basically had this idea like, oh, well, let's call it patches, right? Because it's like a software patch and it's like a patch on your backpack or whatever. So I'm like, all right, great, yeah, patch, that's a great idea. Let's go with patches. And so I tweet saying, patches are patches. You heard it here first, or something. And like crickets, no response, no Twitter engagement, nobody said anything. And so we go back to the drawing board. We're like, all right, well, patches, that's not the right name. Nobody cared. That didn't really capture anybody's imaginations. And then, I started thinking, and I'm like, oh yeah, Chmod plus X executable, it's an NFT. Okay, X NFTs, right? And then I go on the Twitter and I tweet, okay, X NFTs are coming soon. And then Twitter just starts blowing up. People start retweeting it. I put it in my name as well, right, when I tweeted it. So it said XNFT Armani. And then people started putting it in their names. People had no idea what it was. And there was all this momentum that started happening. And so once that started happening, I was talking to Tristan, and we were like, oh yeah, we gotta this start. We have to go with this. This starts now. Create a Twitter account, create a Discord account. And so we created the Twitter, we created the Discord to like capture all that momentum, and get all the followers and get people into the Discord channel and stuff. But the Discord channel was closed. And so this was like kind of like a carrot, right? So basically, we had the invites to the Discord being like this private thing, where people can, earn their way into a Discord by, doing something interesting, right? And so Tristan, people started like trying to compete for invites to the Discord, and Tristan is like a total a total anime fan, and so he's like doing all these anime gifs in response, and one of the gifts that he does is a blue ball. It's an anime girl throwing a dodgeball and hitting another person. And basically just like, I think it just clicked for him. He was like, all right, this is how you get into the Discord. And so he basically starts replying to people with this dodgeball hitting a person anime meme. And then people were like, oh, give me the blue ball, give me the blue ball, give me the blue ball. Meanwhile, not knowing what XNFTs were. And then one thing led to another, and eventually people were like, oh, you're giving me blue balls or whatever, because nobody knew what XNFTs were. And so that's kind of like where blue balls kind of like came from. And then WoW is kind of an interesting kind of follow on to that, which is that I texted Tristan kind of in the middle of the night one night, and was like, hey, like we need a cult mantra, because we have a Discord community. We need something where like we need something that was like positive, that was strong, that people could like rally around and like feel like kind of like build a strong community around it, right? And I texted him and I said, we are one, right? And like we are one. I love we are one because it's like, all right, it's like it feels like a collective. It's very positive. It's something, it's a little cultish, right? And it's something that people could rally around. So I tweeted it and then started saying we are one, and started saying it in Discord and things like that. And then somebody eventually posts an Owen Wilson meme of him saying wow. And the meme said WAO, and it was like an Owen Wilson face, and he said wow, and the Owen Wilson kind of like tone or whatever. And that is kind of where wow, WAO came from. And then the memes kind of just started rolling from there.
Yep. I remember like you're retweeting like all the WoW, like if anyone like posted, I'm not sure it was WoW or XNFT, but like whenever someone posted like WoW, you used to retweet it. And like some people like,
Yeah, I'm pretty sure a lot of people, there was definitely like a 2 to 4 weeks where I retweeted everything that had to do with WoW or Blue Balls or XNFTs, and I'm sure plenty of people muted me from that, which I apologize for. It was good fun though.
Yeah, that's normal. Yeah, and like the mystery behind like WoW was really like the best because like I remember like I got the access to Discord and there were like all these like mini games. I thought like okay, this is XNFTs. I should and I tweeted like I tested XNFTs and it was like not really XNFTs. So like this like the secrecy and like the whole thing was like really awesome. And it was really great being part of it. Going to the next question. Which okay, this is the rapid fire round. So answer it quick. Best marketing strategy.
Best marketing strategy. Have fun, be yourself, be internally consistent, or be externally consistent with your internal views. I think a lot of people go wrong with marketing by just like making up stuff that they don't believe in, but they think other people want to hear it, so they say it. When the most effective marketing is just about being truthful and consistent with your internal beliefs.
Awesome. Explain me XNFTs like I'm five.
Decentralized applications and talking NFTs.
Do you think a 5-year-old will understand this?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, maybe they might not understand decentralized applications. I would just say like it's a new version of iOS and talking and talking photos.
Monkeys.
It's talking monkeys. Like I think a good one is like Harry Potter. If you ever viewed seen Harry Potter, like the newspapers in Harry Potter, maybe that's like a good way of explaining XNFTs. It's like yeah, this newspaper is an XNFT.
Cool. 9 to 5 job or job is my life.
For me, it's job is my life, but everyone's different.
Solana or Aptos.
Solana or Aptos. It's hard to compare the two. One is brand new, unproven technology with that's trying to make its mark on the world. One is more or less proven and established. So yeah, Solana obviously.
Random or Solid.
Oh, I gotta go Solid. Yeah. Yeah, notice the Phantom guys, but Solid was like it was the original, right?
Shit posting or trolling.
Shit posting or trolling. I guess, I mean, to me, they're kind of the same. I would say shit posting. Yeah, definitely shit posting.
AI or crypto.
Oh, crypto. Yeah.
These are the final question. Like this is the last segment. Conclusion. Advice for new developers.
Work on concrete products. You'll learn as fast as possible through that, and then don't let any layer of abstract. Don't be afraid to traverse layers of abstraction. It should be very normal for you to clone or fork a library and go look at the code and go down every layer to solve a bug.
Gotcha. Advice for bear market survivors.
Bear market survivors. Be kind, have good vibes, keep building, be responsible with your finances. Don't gamble away your life savings.
Advice for open source devs.
Advice for open source devs: be kind to your maintainer.
Final question. Sorry, not a final question. What are some productivity tips you would give to anyone, except like shaving your, like not shaving?
What was the question? What's the question?
Productivity tips for like anyone, like except like not shaving part.
Productivity tips. Uh, productivity tips, except not shaving. I would say, it's nothing special, right? Just like the basic stuff, like batch together meetings, minimize meetings, and then if you do have to have meetings, then make them back to back. Um, I prefer to have all my meetings in the afternoon, and I try to keep the morning for deep work. Um, so that's probably like the basic thing. Yeah.
Got it. Lessons like lessons you have learned like till now, which you would like to pass on to the next generation or like next like the people listening to the podcast right now.
Yeah, I think the main lesson is that like all of the amazing stuff in the world was created by people just like you. And so, the only requirement to achieve equal or more like, you know, amazing accomplishments is just the desire to just go do it. So yeah, that's, you know,
Cool.
that's the advice I would give.
Awesome. One final question. What is the alpha for the listeners?
What is the alpha? Oh man. I'm really not a source of alpha. I have, I have not really ever traded, not actively. I've bought in stocks and like basic tokens like Ethereum, and mostly I've just seen the things I purchase go down in price, not up. So I think I would not take good financial advice for myself, and so I would not give it.
Oh no, I meant like not like financial alpha, more of like what's happening new at Backpack, like what's coming soon, like Solana, something.
Yeah, the alpha I think is probably going to be the the new NFT collection we're about to drop. So stay tuned for that.
Cool. Awesome. It was great chatting with you, Armani. Like this was like I think we chatted for around 2 hours and like didn't realize it was really 2 hours. Uh, yes, thank you so much for joining the podcast. Hope to talk to you soon.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Sujesh.
Awesome.